Hi, I'm Alec with FlashCut CNC. In this video, we will be talking about the 2000 and 5400 Limit Home Switch Kit for the mill. This includes mounting brackets, hardware, 10-foot 5-pair limit switch cables, and 5 switches to easily mount on your Shoreline mill powered by FlashCut CNC. The Limit Home Switch Kit will allow you to safely operate your machine without over travel and enable you to establish a repeatable home position for production purposes. When you receive your kit, it will come in this bag with the instruction manual and all the parts you need. For installation, all you'll need is an adjustable wrench, a flathead screwdriver, and 3 Allen wrenches, 5 32 inches, 3 32 inches, and 9 64 inches. The parts include 5 brackets, 5 limit switches, one for X positive, X negative, Y positive, Y negative, and Z positive, a variety of screws and nuts, an optional set of spacers if your Z travel is limited, and the cable. We will start with the X negative limit switch. You'll need 2 440 by 5/8 screws, 1 1032 by 1/2 screw, 2 440 nuts, the smallest bracket, and one of the limit switches. Begin by having the largest hole in the bracket facing the bottom and toward the mill. And what you're going to do is take the limit switch and line it up underneath like this so that 2 of the holes line up. The largest hole should still have nothing behind it. Then what you're going to do is take both of your screws and put them through the top of the 2 holes so that your limit switch is in place like this. Now go ahead and fasten those on with the nuts. And then using your hex wrench, you can tighten that. And if you want to make sure it's really tight, go ahead and get your wrench involved. Now you're going to take your 5 32 hex wrench and using your 1032 socket head cap screw, mount the limit switch using that hole to the corner of the table underneath the mill. And be sure that you tighten this one all the way because there's only one screw holding it in place. So we're going to go ahead and tighten that quite a bit. And that is the X negative switch. Now we're going to be installing the X positive limit switch. First, take one of the 3 larger brackets that you have and orient it so that the L-shaped portion is facing inward. This is how it's going to be mounted onto the mill. Now take your limit switch and position it so that the actual button, the actual switch portion, is on the bottom, far bottom corner. The prongs will be facing up towards you. Now we're going to go ahead and using 2 440 by 5/8 screws, we're going to put the limit switch in place. And using 2 440 nuts, we'll go ahead and lock that into position. And then you could take your hex wrench and adjustable wrench to tighten that completely. And be sure not to tighten it too much. The limit switch is made of plastic, and if you tighten it too much, that could break. So you don't need it too tight, you just need it to be able to hold in place. Now we're going to go ahead and mount the bracket and the limit switch onto the mill. First thing you need to do is remove these 2 screws from the X-axis motor. These are 832 by 3/8. And you can set these aside if you ever want to take out the limit switch and restore it to just the motors. Now we're going to take the bracket and making sure that the limit switch is facing inward. We're going to put that over where the 2 screws were. And using 832 by 1/2 screws, we're going to position the limit switch into place. And you can go ahead and tighten these all the way. And now the X positive limit switch is installed. Now we're going to install the Y negative limit switch. Go ahead and take the curved limit switch bracket. You'll see that there's a piece of double stick tape on the inside of it. Opposite the double stick tape, you're going to take the limit switch and making sure that the switch is on the bottom, you're going to go ahead and install that using the 440 by 5/8 screws and 440 nuts, like the X limit switch brackets. And then you can go ahead and tighten these, but not too much. And now we'll mount it onto the mill. So first, take the double stick tape off. And be sure to reference your manual. If you have a 2000 mil versus a 5400, you'll be mounting them slightly differently. But here we have a 2000. You'll see right here we have a slightly angled portion holding up the Z-axis. You can go ahead and place that right in the center of the bottom part. And make sure that it's parallel to the Y-axis and directly perpendicular to the X. Even though it's angled slightly outward like this, that's okay. And we found that double stick tape is more than enough to hold it in place. However, if you're uncomfortable using that and would rather drill into this and use some screws, you can do that as well. So now we have the Y negative installed. And in terms of location, you're going to want this about 7/10 of an inch from the foot of the mill here. Double check your manual to see what the tolerance is. It's about 7/10 of an inch though. You have a fair amount of leeway considering that the table from the bottom to the top of the table, that could all come in contact with the switch. Now we'll install the Y positive limit switch. Go ahead and take one of the two larger brackets that you have left and making sure that the limit switch portion is on top. You can go ahead and attach that to the outside, again opposite of the L-shaped curve, and having the switch facing toward the back of the mill. You can use two 440 by 5/8 screws and two 440 nuts to tighten that into place. And now we'll go ahead and mount it onto the mill. Now we'll be installing the Y positive bracket onto the mill. First, remove the two screws holding the Y motor onto the mill. These are the two screws that are facing the X motor. Now using two 832 by 1/2 screws, we're going to place the bracket onto here so that the switch is facing the table. And we'll go ahead and tighten that into place. And now we have both of the Y limit switches installed. We'll move on to the Z positive. Now we're going to install the Z limit switch onto the bracket. We're going to take the bracket and orient it so that the L portion is facing the mill. Now using the limit switch, we're going to have it so the button is facing down, and this time it's going to be installed on the inside of the bracket. And using two 440 by 5/8 screws, we'll install that into place. And just a reminder not to do this too tight, otherwise the limit switch can crack. And we'll go ahead and mount it onto the Z-axis. Now we'll mount the Z positive bracket right above the motors. You'll need two 832 by 1/2 screws. And we'll start by removing the screws from the motor. These are the two screws that are on the far side of the X motor. Now we're going to take our bracket with the limit switch installed and place that where those two screws were. And using two 832 by 1/2 screws, we'll secure that into place. And now we have all 5 limit switches installed. Now we'll attach the cable to the different limit switches. You're going to want to attach them all to the NC and the COM leads, which are the ones on the outside. So the middle one does not get a wire to it. Now you'll see on the cable that each pair of wires is labeled 1 through 5. 1 is X negative, 2 is X positive, 3 is Y negative, 4 is Y positive, and the fifth one is Z positive. So we'll start by attaching cable number 1 to X negative, just like that. And this will be the same arrangement for the other 4 limit switches. So there's one. And this is a fairly long cable. Feel free to use zip ties or something along those lines to kind of organize it. Just make sure that they're not in the way of the actual mill so they don't get caught anywhere. There's 2 on X positive. Now we'll take 3 and put it in Y negative. And here, if you used the double stick tape, you might want to support the underside of the limit switch as you push down. Now we'll put 4 to Y positive and 5 to Z positive. And now that all the wires are installed, we can go ahead and what I like to do is tuck it underneath the lathe. You'll see there's a little bit of a gap that runs the length of it. So if you have any wires that are in the way, you can just put them under there. And for the most part now, you just want to get these out of the way of the actual machine. And be sure to give them some slack so that they can run the complete X and Y distances. And now we'll go ahead and enter the software. So now that we've installed all of the limit switches, we're going to go ahead and take the cable and plug that into the input. And now in the software, we're going to go to Configuration, I/O, and click Input Lines. Now you'll see there's line number. You'll have all the different numbers under there and function. So for the inputs, we've used lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are X positive and negative, Y positive and negative, and Z positive. So we're going to go ahead and arrange those. We're going to call all of these home and limit. And now we need to define a location for all of these. So we have X negative for line 1. This was in the directions, we lined them all up this way. Line 2 was X positive. Line 3 was Y negative. 4 was Y positive. And 5 was Z positive. So be sure to click OK down in the bottom left corner. Now each of the input lines should be assigned to the different limit switches. So in order to test this, we're going to go to Controller, Input Line Status. And as you can see, all of the different input lines are closed. And what this means is the limit switch is not tripped. So to test this out, we're going to go ahead and manually press each of the 5 limit switches. So starting with X negative, we're going to go ahead and push on that. And as you can see, it becomes open on the software. So this limit switch is working. We'll try X positive. You can see that's also working. Do Y negative. That is working as well. Y positive and Z positive. So now, to give you an idea of what this means, we'll go ahead and we'll jog in the Y negative direction until the table hits the limit switch. And if you watch the program, you'll see that it just stops it automatically for you, even if you're still holding down the mouse. There's the error message that pops up. It tells you that you've switched the limit switch, and that keeps you from jogging any further. Next, we're going to show you the homing feature. So first, we're going to go up to Configuration, and under Machine, you want to go down and click Basic Homing. Now, here's what all of this means here. You can see the home ends, and what this means is the home, which is your machine's way of remembering where a certain point is. That home will be next to X negative, Y negative, and Z positive. So in other words, think of where those limit switches are. The home will be close to those. Home order, this is just the order that it travels in to verify that you're at home. The third column is home axis. The 2 options are yes or no. Basically, this just means, do you want to home that axis? If, say, you don't have a Z, we would say no for that. Next is the home switch offset. This is how far you're going to be from the limit switch. This is what home is going to be defined as. So 0.1 inches from X, 0.1 from Y, and 0.1 from Z, all from the limit switch. And the homing rate is the speed at which that axis will travel to find the home. So now that we have all that, we'll come down to home. We'll go to seek home, and what's going to happen is the machine is going to move, trip the limit switches, and then move 0.1 inches off of each of those, and that'll be defined as home. Now that we have a home, you can see that machine, under machine, you can see X, Y, and Z are all zeroed. So that's what home is. And on the actual program, you can see this blue box. This is defined as the machine envelope. You cannot go outside of this. So for example, right now, if I were to jog in the X negative direction, it wouldn't let me. You know, you can go Y positive, and you'll see on the program where your point is. So we're going to move down here to home. And what we're going to do first is click Seek Home so that we can go back to the homing point. As you can see, this is going very slowly. We're moving at one axis at a time at the speed that we defined earlier. So we're going to go ahead and feed hold this. And now that we have a home, you can see that the fast home option has popped up. You can now click on this, and what will happen is the machine will travel at a much faster rate back to the homing point. You'll see that X and Y move at the same time. So now that we've homed the machine, you can see that this information window has appeared. And what it's telling us is the discrepancy between our current position and where we were the last time we homed. You can see that it's down to below 1/1000th of an inch for all three axes. And what this is that there's only a certain amount of tolerance within the switches. So this is a negligible distance, and you can click yes to just bypass this. This concludes our video on the home and limit switch kits for the Sherline Mills. We hope you find this as useful as we do for homing and protecting your machine from over travel. If you have any questions, feel free to call or email us at the number or email address below. From all of us here at Flash Cut CNC, thank you for watching.